So, the 2025 Formula 1 World Championship is just around the corner, and by around the corner, I mean literally next week. And with pre-season testing coming to a close last week, it only makes sense that for the second year in a row, I go through my predictions for the upcoming season. Last year, I only got 3 drivers correct, with some of them being way off the mark, so hopefully this time, I try and rectify that, but knowing my luck, I probably won't. So without any further hold-ups, let's go through my predictions as to how the final year of these current regulations will unfold. So, some ground rules before we start. Like last year, I will start off with the Drivers' Championship from last to first and go through my reasons why I have put that driver in a certain place, and then when that's finished, I will quickly go through my Constructors' Championship prediction before finishing this video. Sound simple? Good. So let's get right into this, as this one, I can't lie, I kept chopping and changing several times as it was really hard to predict. Now hang on, I know what you are thinking. JW, why on earth are there 21 positions in your graphic when there are only 20 drivers on the grid and only 10 teams? Cadillac aren't debuting yet, nor will they be allowed to only have one driver in their team, so why are there 21? Well, bear with me, all will be revealed soon. It's not an error, I promise. So starting off with P21, and in this position, I've sadly gone with Gabriele Bortoleto. Yeah, I know, it sounds cruel given there is intrigue with the reigning Formula 2 champion, but the reason why I have put him in last is for 2 reasons. Number 1, he's driving a Sauber, which during testing has once again not set the world alight and is looking to be the slowest car on the grid again. And secondly, I'm not fully sold on this guy. Now look, I'm not saying he's a terrible driver, but apart from winning Formula 2 and Formula 3 back to back, his results outside of those 2 series aren't really anything to write home about, and given he won the Formula 3 title with a Trident, which was known for being a rocket ship during the previous spec of F3 cars, combined with the fact that Formula 2 is a mess right now, as I covered in a video I made last year, it's hard for me to gauge where he is compared to the rest of the field, and it won't be helped by the fact that he is driving a Sauber this year. Now look, I do hope Gabriele is able to have a good rookie season and he's able to prove a lot of people wrong, but as of right now, I can't see him beating his teammate, nor can I see him finishing anywhere higher than last, even with one of the drivers not doing a full season. More on that driver in a little bit. So yeah, unfortunately for Gabriele, and unfortunately for many Brazilian fans, I've got him down in last place. Moving on to P20, and sticking with the subject of being cruel, I've put Jack Doohan. Now hang on, hear me out. Yes, I am well aware that Alpine looked very good during pre-season testing, and I am also well aware that they could end up being best of the rest this year. However, with Jack, there are 2 reasons why I have put him down here. Number 1, and like with a lot of people, I don't actually rate the guy, and I generally think he'll be ran circles this year by Pierre Gasly. But secondly, and most importantly, I don't think he will be in that seat for very long, hence why there are 21 spaces on my graphic rather than 20. It's no secret that Doohan was not Alpine's number 1 choice when it came to replacing Esteban Ocon, as for a while, their number 1 choice was in fact Carlos Sainz after he was booted out by Ferrari to make way for Lewis Hamilton. However, as we know by now, Sainz will be driving for Williams this year on a multi-year deal, which as a result put him out of contention of being Pierre Gasly's new teammate. With little options left on the table, Alpine ended up promoting Jack Doohan to the race seat, who since the second half of 2022, following the Oscar Piastri contract saga, was the team's reserve driver, and to his credit, has been waiting for a drive in F1 for quite a while, ever since finishing 3rd in the Formula 2 Championship in 2023. However, when a certain driver, who we'll get onto later, managed to do a Micah Richards and burst onto the scene, it left Alpine in a bit of a situation, and it has now got to a point where ever since they signed said driver as a quote-unquote reserve driver for 2025, it's made it pretty obvious that Doohan will not be in that seat for very long. It's rumoured that Jack has a 5 to 6 race contract with Alpine, which would take him to either Jeddah or Miami. And even though it is rumoured that he has a performance clause on his contract, I honestly don't think it's going to matter whether he does well or not in these first few races, as in my opinion, I think Alpine have already made their minds up, particularly Flavio Briatore. Now, whilst I don't rate the guy, as mentioned earlier, I do feel that he is being treated unfairly here, as like with Nick de Vries in 2023, he's not being given a fair chance to prove himself. However, at the same time, I don't think in the limited amount of races he's rumoured to have that he will set the world alight, and I do honestly believe he is going to drown, judging from his results he got before he got to F3 and F2, as well as the race he did at Abu Dhabi. Now, fair enough, he was using old car parts like Esteban Ocon did, before he got booted of course, and he was always going to get thrashed by Pierre Gasly, who was running the new parts. However, even with the old car parts, I was expecting him to at least be around 16th in qualifying, given he knew the car pretty well, judging from the 3 practice sessions he did, as well as the mid-season tests he did with the same car, and the fact that he has driven around Abu Dhabi before. However, come qualifying, that was not the case at all, as he ended up qualifying last, being the only driver not to get into the 1 minute 23s. Now, I'm not going to bash him too hard about his race, as to give him the benefit of the doubt, Alpine did mess up his strategy, but judging from his qualifying pace, it's not a very good look in my opinion, and I do believe as a result, he will not score a point during the 5 or 6 races he's rumoured to do. That being said, I do think he will do enough to just beat Bortoleto on a countback due to the fact that Gabriel is driving a Sauber. So yeah, it might sound cruel, but that's why I put doohan in P20. I was tempted to put him in last, but judging from Alpine's pace they've shown in testing, I don't think that will be the case. Anyways, I've spoken about doohan long enough, so let's move on. In P19 and next on this list, I've put Nico Hülkenberg. Oh Nico, why did you decide to leave Haas? Now, it's no secret that the reason why Nico decided to return to Sauber is because of the team becoming Audi next year. However, given it's been reported that the development of the Audi engine hasn't been great, combined with the fact that Sauber appear to have the worst car again this year, I honestly think Nico is in for a tough ride, and although I believe he will beat Bortoleto this year, given his experience, I do sadly believe he will finish low down in the table. Now, I am well aware that I predicted this last year for Nico, which went as well as Arsenal's title hopes. However, I'm more confident this time that this will sadly be the case, as Sauber have shown no sign of progressing anytime soon. Watch this backfire in my face. Next up, we have P18, and in this position, I've put Lance Stroll. Oh dear Aston, what have you done? Just like with their livery this year, they've also managed to botch their performance, as whilst they don't have the worst car on paper, they do appear to have the second worst, which ain't too much of a surprise given how much they dropped off towards the back end of last year, and the fact that it's more likely that Aston are putting all their eggs towards 2026, which will be the first Adrian Newey designed Aston, and the first Aston to have a Honda engine. Now, I do expect Aston to improve a tad bit, like we saw with Alpine last year, as the season goes by, but I'm not expecting a huge improvement, especially with them focusing on 2026. And as for Lance Stroll, I can't see him getting anywhere higher than 18th, as I expect Lance to once again have a dreadful season, where inconsistency will once again creep in his driving. Will this be his last year with the team, especially with the Tsunoda rumours roaming around? I'm not sure, to be honest. I mean, we are talking about Lawrence Stroll here, aka F1's resident Bond villain. Next up in 17th, and this one was a really tough one to call, especially with how close the midfield looked during testing, but in the end, I've gone with Isaac Hadjar. Yeah, sounds really cruel, but given how close it is, someone had to get the wooden spoon out of that big group. Isaac, like with other drivers on the grid, will be making his debut this year in F1, with him driving for Racing Bulls, or VCarb, or AlphaTauri, or Toro Rosso, or Minardi. Anyway, you get the point. Isaac does have a lot of potential, especially given what he was able to do in a handicapped Campos in F2 last year. However, with him having a reputation of being quite erratic and also having a temper over the radio, like a certain Yuki Tsunoda did during his first year in F1, I am expecting it to be a learning year for him, and with how close the midfield is, I expect him to be quite low down in the championship. Unless Helmut Marko does a driver switch mid-season, but honestly, I can't see that happening. On to P16 now, and sadly in this position, I put Fernando Alonso. Oh Fernando, what have you done to deserve this? Yeah, as mentioned earlier, it ain't looking good for Aston Martin, who appear to have the second worst car on the grid, and whilst I don't doubt for 1 minute that Fernando will be able to drag the Aston during the season, I sadly don't see him finishing anywhere higher than 16th, given Aston are clearly focusing more on 2026, which it's safe to say could be make or break for Fernando in terms of whether he stays on for a further year or whether he decides to call it a day, especially with the Max Verstappen rumours lingering around. Yeah, it's probably going to be a long and tough year for Fernando, it must be said. Next up in P15, I've got Alexander Albon. Wait, Alex getting beaten by a teammate this year? What? Okay, that sounded cringe. Yes, I do generally think that Alex will get beaten this year, and to be honest, I think the signs were there since the second half of last year. When Williams sacked Logan Sargeant to make way for Franco Colapinto, Franco, despite having barely any time in the car, was on the pace straight away and was giving Alex a headache before Colapinto had to use the old car parts due to crashes at Interlagos and Las Vegas. Whilst Alex won't have Franco as a teammate this time, he will have Carlos Sainz, who during his time at Ferrari proved himself to be a solid frontrunner, and with the pace he showed in testing, it's plausible that Carlos could run circles around him, and it's plausible that Alex, judging from the competition around him, could end up having a tough year. Now look, do I believe he will drown like Logan Sargeant and Nicholas Latifi did before him? No, absolutely not. But I do believe, judging from when Franco was his teammate, he will get frustrated during the year, which could lead to poor results, and as such, a poor place in the championship, especially in a car that's looked decent during testing. Now, do I believe that Alex will get the boot after this year if he doesn't perform? Honestly, I don't know, but it's safe to say he does have a lot of pressure on his shoulders this year. Right, 7 done, 14 left to do. So moving on to P14, and in this position, I put Franco Colapinto. Wait, what? Why is he on this list? He's not assigned to any team, so why is he randomly on this list? I mean, there's the whole thing with doohan, but... Oh. Yeah, this makes sense now. Yes, it's pretty much obvious at this point that along with doohan getting the boot after a few races, Colapinto will come in as his replacement. I mean, the fact that Alpine have been constantly promoting him on their Twitter, combined with the fact that he has signed a multi-year deal with the team, which is rumoured to be up to 2029, makes it very clear where this is heading. I mean, a multi-year deal to be a reserve driver for the team? Yeah, come off it Alpine, you are not fooling anyone. You don't announce that sort of deal for a reserve driver, it's obvious you have serious plans for him. It's very obvious that Flavio has made him his new chosen one, like Michael Schumacher back in the mid-90s and Fernando Alonso in the mid-2000s.
He is the chosen one. You must see it.
Yeah, I had to put that scene in from Star Wars. Anyways, back on topic. Given the performances that Franco was able to deliver straight away when he was thrown in at the deep end at Williams, it's no surprise that this guy is getting a lot of hype, and it does make me wonder why Alpine didn't wait a little longer to sign Franco if they didn't have Jack in their plans. It's a mess they could have easily have avoided. But either way, I expect Franco to make his Alpine debut at either Miami or Imola, and when he does, I expect him to be on the pace straight away, as I believe he will get a load of free practice sessions between now and whenever he replaces Jack to get himself ready to partner alongside Gasly. Now I don't expect him to beat Gasly in the standings, as Gasly is obviously going to have a head start on him in the championship, but once he's in the car, I think 14th will be the maximum he can achieve. Either way, he's there for the long run, and I am intrigued to see how the relationship unfolds, especially when Mercedes supply engines to them in 2026, which is an engine that Franco is familiar with given his time at Williams. Only time will tell, I suppose. Next up, in the unlucky position of 13th, I put the Red Bull reserve driver, Yuki Tsunoda. Well, I guess it's one way of giving him a Red Bull drive, even if he's not actually racing for them. Unless something happens to Max or Liam during the season. It's very obvious that Yuki is entering what is more than likely his final year with the Red Bull sister team and even Red Bull as a whole, as with them splitting with Honda after this year, and with Yuki's connections with the Japanese manufacturer, he will probably be saying sayonara to the brand, but hopefully not from Formula 1. Here's hoping he gets the Aston drive next year, but I'm not holding my breath. With it being his final year with them, I'm expecting him to have a no bull attitude, with him putting in some stellar performances throughout the year to send Red Bull a message that they should have promoted him when they had the chance. But with it looking like that Racing Bulls have the 8th quickest car on the grid, being behind Haas, Alpine and even Williams, I'm expecting him to drag that car to at least 13th in the standings, with him running circles around Hadjar on the basis that he is more experienced than the young Frenchman, because #justice for Yuki. Next up, we arrive at the first of the two Haases, as in P12 we have Esteban Ocon. Ocon, after being thrown under the bus by Alpine last year, is entering his first year with Haas, with it being the first time in his career that he's being powered by a Ferrari engine. Sounds similar to someone else is having the same experience this year. Ocon is joining the team at the right time, as Haas have come off the back of an amazing 2024 season, which saw them only just miss out on 6th in the Constructors thanks to Alpine getting a double podium at Interlagos, a race which Ocon had something to say about. Whilst Haas seem to be behind Alpine and Williams judging from testing, I do expect them to be in the mix when it comes to the sharp end of the midfield, and I expect Ocon to have a strong season now that he is not being held back by old car parks, but in time he will just get beaten by his teammate, who, speaking of which, in P11 I've put Oliver Bearman. Ollie, it's safe to say, in the few races he did last year, made an impression on a lot of fans, with him coping well in his first ever race, despite literally being thrown in at the deep end at Ferrari, following Carlos Sainz's appendicitis. Ollie then did 2 races for Haas, replacing Kevin Magnussen for 2 different reasons, and apart from Interlagos where he seemed to struggle in wet conditions, he once again made an impression, grabbing a points finish at Baku, and also in both races, being able to out-qualify Nico Hülkenberg, who had more experience in the car than he did. Ollie is entering his first full season in F1, and I expect it to be a very strong season, to the point where he is able to beat his new teammate Esteban Ocon in the standings. Now granted, I don't expect him to beat Ocon straight away, given Ocon has more experience than him, but as the season progresses, I expect him to have the edge on him, which in turn will see him just edge Esteban in the standings. One thing's for sure though, I expect it to be very close between the two teammates. Let's just hope for Ocon's sake it doesn't end the same way as it did with Checo, Fernando and Pierre, even though I believe with 2 of those teammates it wasn't fully on him. We now arrive at the top 10, and to kick off the second half of the standings, I've got Carlos Sainz down as finishing 10th. Wait, are Williams in the top 10? Have you gone mental, JW? No, I haven't, but thanks for your concern. It's safe to say during testing that Williams have looked very impressive and look to be in the fight for the best of the rest title, particularly in the hands of Carlos Sainz, who, like with many people, I believe will beat his teammate Alex Albon by quite a comfortable margin, judging from how Alex coped when he had Colapinto as his teammate. But the question I think everyone will be curious to know is whether Carlos can achieve a podium with Williams. Personally speaking, I don't think he will, as I think he will need a lot of luck to go his way for that to be a reality. But that being said, I do expect him to be a consistent points challenger now that Williams finally have sufficient funding due to them finally having a title sponsor. Who knows what 2026 will have in store for the Oxfordshire-based team. Finishing off the best of the rest title, as I believe the top 8 will be occupied by the top 4 teams again, and in P9 I've put Pierre Gasly. Yeah, Alpine have looked very good in pre-season testing, it must be said, which is a change considering things seem to always go wrong for them. It really does feel like Alpine want to end Renault's final year in F1 with a bang, and I don't mean the engine this time. Themselves and Williams have definitely caught people's attention during testing, and especially in the hands of Pierre Gasly, I can definitely see him doing a similar job to what Carlos Sainz may do at Williams, judging from the performances he put in towards the end of last year, which was enough to bag him 10th in the championship. It will be interesting to see though how he copes in future years with Alpine, especially with Franco Colapinto on the radar. Now we move on to our top 8 and essentially the juicy end of the championship. In P8, and once again going back to the word cruel, I've put Liam Lawson. Yeah, I sadly see another second driver curse at Red Bull, this time involving poor Liam, who, it's safe to say, has been getting a lot of unnecessary hate from fans who wanted Yuki in the seat or were salty that he booted Checo and Daniel out respectively. After only 11 races in F1, clearly showing Helmut Marko has not learned anything from the previous time he did this, hello Alex Albon, Liam for his first full season has been thrown in at the deep end at Red Bull to partner alongside arguably the best driver in the world, Max Verstappen. That being said though, although I feel he will finish down in 8th, I don't believe he will be as bad as Checo, as throughout testing, apart from a spin he had on day 1, it does appear that he is a bit more comfortable in the car than what Checo was, and I do believe he will be a bit closer to everyone else in the top 14 battle, even if he does end up taking the wooden spoon in the end. And personally speaking, I don't believe he will get demoted during the season like some people believe he will, as I do see him being part of Red Bull's future, especially if Verstappen decides to leave the team after 2026, given the rumours linking him with a move to Aston in the future. But only time will tell, of course. On the topic of inexperienced drivers, in P7 I put Andrea Kimi Antonelli. God, I am hyped for this guy, I can't lie. Safe to say there hasn't been this much hype for a rookie in F1 since Charles Leclerc in 2018, with his junior Formula results speaking for itself, if we ignore the Mechachrome lottery from last year. Mercedes clearly had big things for him, even going as far as to make him skip F3 and also have him make his debut with a top team. But whether it ends up being a Lewis Hamilton-like debut season or ends up being a massive flop remains to be seen. For me, I think it will be a mix of the two. For starters, I can see him having a good season, with him potentially being an outsider for a win in his rookie year. However, at the same time, I can also see his inexperience creeping in from time to time, which may lead to a mistake here and there, which could end up costing himself and the team a good result, especially during a weekend where Mercedes looks strong, given I see the team being inconsistent again like they have been in previous years. This also means I expect him to be beaten by his more experienced teammate, who, speaking of which, in P6 I put George Russell. George the Russell. Wait, I think somebody already says this. Anyways, George is entering this year with a lot of expectations on his shoulders, as with Lewis no longer at the team, he is now effectively the number 1 driver at Mercedes. Last year, he arguably had his best year at Mercedes, with him getting the measure of Lewis on most occasions. This year, however, he will have a new challenge on his hands in the form of Kimi Antonelli, who, as mentioned earlier, has a lot of hype surrounding him. Whilst I expect Russell to beat Kimi in the standings, thanks to him having more experience than him, I do expect Kimi to possibly give him a hard time this year once the season progresses and Kimi irons out any mistakes he may have at the beginning of the season. And perhaps in 2026, George may need to watch his shoulders, given the raw speed Kimi has clearly shown, as proved with some of the competitive times he showed in pre-season testing. And who knows, if Kimi ends up running circles around him in the future, it could lead to George potentially leaving the team, especially with the rumours that link him with a possible move to Red Bull, should Max Verstappen potentially move to Aston in 2027. But that's all for the future. Right now we are in the present day, and I feel for this year, George will have the edge, but not by much. Next up is 5th position, and this one may cause a bit of controversy in the comments, because for this one, I've put Lewis Hamilton. Ooh, Lewis down in 5th in his first year with Ferrari, in a car that's potentially a title contender this year. Surely that's an error, right? Well, no, it isn't, and I'll explain why. Now look, don't get it twisted, I'm not one of those people who thinks Lewis is washed. I made my opinions about that clear in my reaction video I did at the end of last year. Go check it out if you're interested, as it has my lovely face in it, even though I was suffering from a cold that day. Thing is though, although I still think he's one of the quickest drivers on the grid, I also have to acknowledge at the same time that Lewis is not the same driver he used to be back when he was dominating with the ever-conquering Mercedes in the mid to late 2010s heading into the 2020s. Last year was a horrible year for Lewis for many reasons, with some of that being down to him, and whilst I do think he will have a slightly better year at Ferrari, I don't think it will be to the point where he is challenging for the championship, especially given who his teammate is, and also due to McLaren looking quick as well as Max Verstappen being Max Verstappen. Now don't get me wrong, I do think Lewis will win a few races this year, but I don't think it will be as many as what many of his fans are expecting him to get. For Lewis, even though he does have an option to stay a further year, I do think the next 2 years will be make or break for him in terms of whether he will continue in the sport or not, especially when a certain Oliver Behrman is waiting in the wings, given he's highly tipped to be Lewis's successor should he decide to call it a day after 2026. But only time will tell, I suppose. Hopefully Lewis proves me wrong, but I have my doubts. Moving on to P4, and in this position, I put Australia's best hope, Oscar Piastri. Oscar, it's safe to say, had a very good 2024 season, with him picking up his first 2 wins of his career at Hungary and Baku, even if the first one was a bit controversial. 2025 looks to be another strong year for McLaren, with them looking like they once again have the fastest car on the grid, with Ferrari like last year not being too far behind. That being said though, whilst I do believe Oscar has potential and I can see him getting a few more wins this year, I don't think now is the time yet for him to be challenging for the title, and I can see him once again playing a supporting role for Lando. Oscar finished 4th in the championship last year, and I can see him finishing in that position again, which is why I've played it safe and kept him in P4 for this year as well. One thing's for sure though, he does need to sort out his qualifying for this year, as a few times last year he was often making mistakes, which put him on the back foot and saw him being on the wrong sort of track positions to set a competitive time, which often saw him getting knocked out in qualifying. If McLaren are to retain their Constructors' crown from last year, Oscar can't afford to make these silly errors again, as it could allow their rivals to capitalise and take points away from them, especially with how close this season could potentially be. We have now arrived at the top 3 and to the business end of the drivers' standings, and starting off with 3rd place, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but I've put the reigning champion, Max Verstappen. Yep, you are not hearing or seeing things. I do generally believe that this is the year that Max's streak of titles comes to an end, and judging from his body language after day 3, which saw him have a spin, I think even he knows that this is going to be a very tough year. Now don't get me wrong, I do think Max will drag Red Bull this year, and I do think he will get a few wins. I mean, he is the best driver in the world for God's sake. However, even with Max's godlike talents, it's hard to ignore the fact that during the second half of last year, Red Bull's car performance was declining at an alarming rate, which allowed the likes of McLaren, Ferrari and Mercedes to catch up, even to the point where McLaren and Ferrari were able to leapfrog Red Bull in the pecking order, which, combined with Checo having another dreadful season, saw Red Bull lose the Constructors' title to McLaren, with them even finishing behind Ferrari as well. And with no Adrian Newey at the team anymore, I do believe that this decline is going to continue, especially when, if you look at pre-season testing, the Red Bull has looked a bit of a handful when coming out of corners, and I do believe that this could lead to an even bigger issue for Red Bull in the future, especially if Verstappen decides to lead the team in the future, given he does have a clause in his contract which would allow him to leave the team early before his contract is due to expire, which is in 2028. Max was lucky that his first half of the season was so strong that it allowed him to have a big enough gap in the standings to retain his title. However, this year, I don't think Lady Luck will be on his side this time. This means, as a result, I do believe we will have a brand new champion at the end of the year, but with only 2 drivers left, who do I believe will add their name to the World Drivers' Trophy? Well, let's first go through the driver who I believe will finish runner-up in the standings and will just miss out on the title. In P2 and drawing the short straw, I've put Lando Norris. Yeah, even though he is the bookie's favourite, I don't think it will be second time lucky for Lando, as even though McLaren appear to have the quickest car on paper, there's one thing that's stopping me from saying Lando will win the title. We saw throughout last year that whenever Lando was in a position to fight for the win, 9 times out of 10 he would often let the pressure get to him, which often led to silly errors on his part, whether that was down to his race starts, his decision making whenever he was in wheel-to-wheel combat, or him even losing concentration whenever he had a dominant lead up front, as seen at Singapore when he nearly threw away an easy win on a few occasions thanks to some silly and unnecessary errors. During my 2024 reaction video I made last Christmas, I said that Lando needed to do a lot of self-reflecting during the off-season to ensure that he didn't make these mistakes again. But whether he has done that or not is unclear at this very moment. However, as I sit here right now in March 2025, and I'm happy to be proven wrong on this, but I haven't seen enough evidence to suggest that he has put the demons of last year behind him. Now, do I believe Lando will be a title contender this year? Yes, absolutely. McLaren look to have the edge over Ferrari judging from pre-season testing. However, even with the fastest car, do I believe it will be enough for him to win the title? No. Now, I really hope Lando does prove me wrong this year, as I really do like the guy. Fair enough, the way he came across in the media sometimes last year was not very good on his part, Interlagos being the most notable. But for the most part, he does come across as a very likeable guy. However, as I've mentioned with Mikko Hirvonen during his 2009 season in WRC, being the nice guy doesn't win you titles, and you need to have a killer bastard in you to get the job done. But as of right now, and I hope he proves me wrong on this, I haven't seen enough evidence to suggest that, and I do fear he could end up doing what Sebastian Vettel did in 2018 and let the pressure get to him. Hopefully I'm wrong on that, but I'm not holding my breath. So now we only have one driver left, and this is the driver who I believe will take Max's crown in 2025. In P1, if it wasn't already obvious, I've gone with Charles Leclerc. Yep, I honestly believe that this is the year where Ferrari will end their driver's title drought, with Charles Leclerc finally grabbing his first ever title. Although McLaren judging from testing have a quicker car than Ferrari, I do believe the driver in the end will make the difference, as when comparing both Charles and Lando together, Charles for me just has that little bit more compared to Lando. Charles has come off the back of what was arguably his best year in F1, with many, including myself, believing that he is a close second to Max Verstappen. Whilst Max is still the best driver on the grid, the Red Bull this year will hold him back, and this will give Charles possibly the best opportunity to step up to the plate and potentially capture his first world title, which I believe he will grab with both hands, providing Ferrari don't do a Ferrari again. Charles in my mind will beat Lewis in the standings simply because he's been at Ferrari longer than Lewis has, and also the fact that in my opinion, I do believe he is now a better driver than Lewis, which is why I am still very sceptical about Lewis's decision to move to Ferrari. Now, I'm not expecting Charles to dominate the championship, as I do believe Lando and maybe Max will give him a run for his money, but in the end, when the clock stops, I think everything will fall into place for Charles, and I do believe in the end, he will end up becoming the first Monegasque to win the title. Watch this prediction go down the drain. So they are my predictions for what I believe the 2025 standings will look like come the end of the season, and on your screen now is my prediction for how I believe the Constructors' Championship will finish. P10 I've put Sauber, P9 I've put Aston Martin, as although I believe they will make improvements, I don't think they will be as dramatic as Alpine's improvement last year, as I think they will be putting all their eggs onto 2026. P8 I put Racing Bulls, P7 I've put Williams, simply because even though Carlos I believe will finish in the top 10, Alex will ultimately hold the team back. P6 I've put Alpine, simply because of the second driver situation. P5 I've put Haas, P4 I've put Mercedes, P3 I've put Red Bull, as I believe Max's points total, combined with Liam being a bit more closer than what Checo was, will just give them third in the end. P2 I put Ferrari, and P1 and retaining their Constructor's crown will be McLaren, as even though I believe Charles will win the title, I believe Lando and Oscar, like they did last year, will gather a consistent amount of results between them to just give them the edge on Ferrari, combined with the fact that I believe Lewis will somewhat hold Ferrari back in doing the double. And with that concludes my predictions for the 2025 season. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and let me know your prediction on how you believe the 2025 season will unfold. Thanks for watching, hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell, and I will see you in 2 weeks time for the next video. Until then, enjoy next week's season opener at the Australian Grand Prix.